Oh yeah.
Hello everyone and welcome to Anime Club After Dark's movie reviews, a spoiler-free discussion detailing the good, the bad, and the downright ridiculous of anime movies. I'm your host Alex, but you can call me Senpai, and tonight I am joined by our czar of source material, John.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, after you made me deaf before we started this by deep frying your fucking mic.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so tonight, John and I have got together to discuss probably I think it's safe to say it's both of our favorite Studio Ghibli film.
Yes. My favorite Ghibli film of all time.
My favorite Ghibli film and favorite Miyazaki film.
Yeah, it's literally the best. And you know what? Everyone basically says the same thing, so we're not wrong.
Yeah, but for anyone out there that hasn't seen it, as I said, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so you can stay around if you'd like. I guess a little bit of background, though, before we get started on the particulars of this movie. As we said, it was created, written, and directed by Hayao Miyazaki. Unlike a lot of his other films, he also wrote, I guess what would be considered an insert song for this particular movie that plays, I don't know, about somewhere between half and three-quarters of the way through the movie.
It's about the
really
2/3 mark, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a really good song.
Yeah, we swapped between English and Japanese because we watched the English version because that's the one I saw when I was a little babby, and I judged that I liked the English more than the Japanese, which I'll talk about later tonight. But in the English version, it's an English translated song, and it's sung really well. And in the Japanese one, it's an actual Japanese song as well. But they sound very similar, the voice actors who sing it.
Yeah, the singers who were actually doing the song sound very, very similar.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful song. God, that's one thing I'm going to talk so much about tonight. Oh, man,
the music, because that's one of the things you love the most about this. So this originally premiered in Japan July 12th, 1997. It didn't actually get released in the U.S. until October 29th, 1999.
Oof.
I know, oof. But... and we'll get to this. Like, you look at it just animation-wise, and you look at it, it could be like an anime that comes out today. And that's because it had an enormous budget for its time. It had a budget of about 2.1 billion yen. That equates to about 23.5 million US dollars. It only cost 2.1 billion to make. In the Japanese box office alone, when it came out, it made 19.3 billion. So it made its money back and then some.
Yeah,
a lot of some.
It's a little over by like 9 times.
Just about 8.6 times or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a high budget film. You can definitely tell. It looks
it'd be like the
really
equivalent
good.
It'd be like the equivalent of a Marvel movie today making like $8 billion just in the US alone.
And one thing that I want to talk about real quick about this budget is that you can definitely tell that it's high budget because even though it's almost, what would we say, 25 years, right?
It's 23 years old now, but it's closing in on the quarter century mark.
Yeah, it's 23 years old and it still looks fucking phenomenal. Holy shit. Oh.
When this movie came out, as it was today, it was a critical and commercial blockbuster, and it's still kind of considered anime classic today. Fun fact, it was the highest grossing film in Japan in 1997, not like live action or just anime film. It was the highest grossing film period in Japan in 1997, and it held that distinction until 2001 when Spirited Away came out.
Yeah, and it's kind of like similar to how we had the Marvels, or we had James Cameron releasing Titanic, and then it was the #1 movie in the US for like ever, and then he releases Avatar with the blue people, and it tops himself. So it's like James Cameron came up and topped himself again. It's just funny.
Who's first? James Cameron. Who's second? James Cameron.
Cameron.
Do I need to ask who's third?
Yeah, except right now I think it's I'm pretty sure it's Infinity. No.
Yeah, I think Infinity.
It's Endgame?
Endgame. I think
Endgame is #1 now.
Yeah. So, but hey, Avatar 2 is coming out, so anything can happen.
Yeah, whatever.
But yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit of background. I think this film was in production for nearly 2.5 years, but allegedly, according to Miyazaki, he came up with the idea for this movie back in 1970.
Well, I mean, it's definitely got a lot of dated themes that still ring true to today, which is pretty
True.
crazy. Like, that's another thing that this film does. It has a lot of themes.
Yeah, I mean, do we want to go? I know we typically go in order of like art and sound, but do you
Oh
want to
no.
talk about the
Oh
themes
no,
since you mentioned it?
we'll get to that because I need to talk about how good it
Okay.
looks. So,
Okay.
from an animation standpoint, it is fucking fluid.
Hmm.
Like, nothing looks fucking bad in the film. Like, you can tell it's dated. It's something that you look at and like, oh, that's definitely like pre 2010 anime, right? It's not.
But you can certainly tell with the character designs.
Yeah, the character designs are extremely dated, but just like how the shapes are made and stuff, it's not very bubbly like recent Ghibli films are.
Hmm.
But if you told me this was made in '97, it's still very impressive for its time.
It's impressive for now,
Yeah,
especially considering that like 95% or so of the movie is hand drawn. There is some very limited CGI in this movie, but it's used very sparingly. And when it is used, considering the potato computers they had back then to render this shit on, it's really impressive.
so this is my second time watching it because again, I watched this a long time ago when I was like 10 or something, and I was blown away by it then. And just rewatching it before this recording, I was still blown away. I was like, this is so
Hmm.
good. Like, it still looks just as good as I remember. You ever
Yeah.
revisit old things and you're like, wow, this is not hold like Halo 1, for example, which just came out on PC, Master Chief Collection PC. When you look back at the first game, I understand that there's some lighting issues with the remaster, and it didn't look that bad, but it's still amazing how when I remember playing that on Xbox original, how good that looked to me. And then when I look at the videos of it now, I'm like, damn, were my
Damn,
standards
we've come a
that
long way,
low?
haven't we?
Yeah, it's so crazy. But this is
I
something
mean,
that definitely like withstood the stand of time, in my opinion.
yeah, and it's kind of like so. The last thing we did was the last thing movie we reviewed was another Ghibli movie was Nausicaa the Valley of the Wind, which is something that we thought was definitely a product of its time in terms of its animation and its art style. And then you fast forward just over a decade and you get this.
Yeah, and it's insane the quality leap. But then again, that one only used like what'd you say $1 million USD, like
Yeah, it was
just
like
a
it's just
little
over.
under.
It's like 1.5 million
Yeah,
roughly.
so this film obviously had way more budget and assets to work with, so obviously it should be better.
Yeah, I
but
would hope.
but
And also the technology was better.
yeah, and they surprisingly share a very similar theme.
They do. You keep talking about themes. I want to talk about it, but we'll still talk about the art and animation.
Because it's one
Something
of
else
the
that's about well, no. So the animation, I definitely want to talk about how fluid it all is, especially considering all of it's hand drawn. Like, if you want a really good argument for hand drawn animation, like this movie is it. There's actually a lot of stuff that comes out of the mid to late '90s that has a lot of hand drawn animation that are fucking phenomenal examples of why I advocate so heavily for hand drawn animation, and this is a great example of it.
Yeah, like I honestly didn't even notice any CGI, so I don't know where the CGI was. It looked all hand drawn to me, and
I can tell you one element that was definitely CGI, and it was like the demon thing with the boars. That was CGI.
Okay, I could
Like I said, it's like 95% hand drawn.
yeah, and one thing I hate to say this because I love Ghibli films, but this film is not very colorful. That's something that I found very disappointing, but it kind of makes sense. There is a main motif of like nature versus not nature, and they stick to it pretty well. Like they do a great job showing like the forest. It looks very green, lush. You've got the moss clinging to rocks and to the trees, things that, the passage of time has forgotten this place and crept over, and it looks great. It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. It looks phenomenal. However, the lack of color, I kind of didn't like that. Just mainly because the story is great. I know we're supposed to be focusing on the story, but come on, man, it's a visual medium. Give me some eye
Yeah.
candy.
I think what you're specifically saying is like the variety of color. I mean, there is obviously color in this film, but there's not a whole lot of variety. It's like a good example, like with Nausicaa, which we reviewed. I mean, there was a big variety of colors.
Yeah.
Like when you went to the big foresty regions there versus the desert.
Yeah, they had a lot of different biomes in Nausicaa, but that makes
Yeah.
sense because it's supposed to be like post-apocalyptic world or something.
Yeah.
Versus, I believe this takes place like, I don't know,
like feudal
medieval Japan.
Japanish.
Yeah, medieval Japan. So it makes sense that, when you get to like towns and then like civilization, I guess you would call it, it'd be more like brown and like wood and everything. And then the rest is just forest. So that makes sense.
So shall we talk about something you absolutely love about this movie, which is the fucking music?
Oh my God. So I'm going to start off with a negative first, just to get it out of the way, because I'm going to gush for like 5 minutes about the damn music. So
Are you going to talk about the synths?
First of all, yes, there was some synths in here, just for a little tiny part. And it was so out of place for me. And I get it. This is a 90s film. Synths were still kind of popular back then. We just got out of the 80s, and the 80s never ended. So it kind of went from 80 to 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Like at least late 90s it went to then. So I don't like synths that much. It's kind of gross in this film. The sound design is pretty boring. Or not the sound design, I should say. The sound effects.
Yeah.
They use very stock sound effects for like the bullets firing.
Which is a similar criticism we had of Nausicaa as well.
Yeah, and for a movie that does sound design really well with its selection of scoring, the scoring in this, the orchestras, my God, the swells.
It's another team up of Hisaishi and Miyazaki. Joe Hisaishi came back to do the score for this. I'm kind of hoping that we get some more of his music for the new Miyazaki movie.
Yeah, Joe Hisaishi is a literal god. The timing, the swells in the orchestras, the symphonies that get played, the music being cued on time, it's so fantastic. I love
how every single different setting that you go to seems to have its own musical motif.
Yeah, and it fits so well. Oh my God, the sound, guys. I can't get over how good the OST for this is. Something similar to me would be like Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time. It feels like that, where every time you enter a new area, you've got a new motif. There's like the land has changed, the combat's changed, the pacing's changed, and the music goes along very well with each change, and it's fucking great. I love it. But I think the sound effects, though, they're so stock. Like, oh man, when I look at anime movies today, how well they utilize sound effects and sound design together, it's insane to me to think that they would have such a good score, but such boring sound effects.
One thing you notice that in, especially I noticed with Mononoke, is like the footstep sounds. They all sound very, very similar, and it becomes very monotonous.
Yeah, and it's like, come on, they use such stock sounds, and I get it. Maybe it was money constraints, maybe it was time constraints. I get it's faster to use a stock sound and just filter it out and make it sound further and closer for distancing and stuff like that. Yeah. But when you have such a beautiful scoring and swells in your orchestra to illustrate points through the film, you gotta utilize that with your sound effects. Like,
I agree.
It's a shame. It's a real shame.
I think something, again, like Nausicaa, that I think you and I agree on is it has an amazing English dub.
Oh my God, Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, as dated as it is, it's got a great English dub cast. And we did flip between English and Japanese because, again, I was curious what the Japanese sounded like since I've never heard it. And I've got to say, hands down, I like the English way more. It feels not natural, I would say. Like, some of the characters are speaking a little too fast because, I get it, editing issues.
And you got to match the mouth flaps.
Because this is back in the day before we could, control that shit. But when we listen to the Japanese voice acting, it sounds kind of ham-fisted. Like, it's not bad. Okay, the voice actresses on both casts did phenomenal jobs, but it just sounds hammy, a little played up, and I didn't like it. Maybe it's...
I have to say, the English dub has Keith fucking David in it.
Yeah, like, one major difference is there's a little bit of on-title narration, on-title screen, like,
At
narration.
the very beginning of the movie, there's a little narration. It's sort of giving you a little bit of backstory and leading you into what you're about to watch.
Yeah, so in the Japanese one, they don't have a voiceover, but in the English one, they do, and it's Keith David, and I love it. I love Keith David.
Yeah, and then Keith David also goes on to play a supporting character later on in the movie.
Yeah, so I'm glad they got more use out of him. I wish he could have talked more, because I freaking love Keith David.
And again, this, I don't believe this. No, this dub was actually done by Miramax, not Disney. But I think Miramax at the time was owned by Disney. I'm not sure exactly how that works. But it's labeled, the dub is labeled as being produced by Miramax. But it has like names that people fucking recognize. And again, like Mononoke, like the Disney Ghibli dubs. It's got Claire Danes playing San. You had fucking John DiMaggio. You had Minnie Driver. You had Billy Bob fucking Thornton.
Yeah, and they all do a fantastic job.
Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Moro is played by Gillian frickin' Anderson of the X-Files.
Scully, I want to believe.
It's so good, and it's one of the really high points of just watching this movie for me. Is just seeing that, God, when you get A-tier actors, God, the voice acting can sound really good.
Right? And one more thing about the voice acting, when they do the dubbing for like Moro and for the Mononokes in the movie, I freaking loved how they distorted the voices. I loved it. I love that effect. It sounds so good, and it fits so well.
They put like layers of filtering over it, so that you're almost like, is that really who I think it is?
Yeah, like sometimes when they talk, you're like, I can't really tell, but then there are some moments where their filters are a little weakened, so then you can tell who's actually voice acting, and it's like it's so good.
And it's that you see that especially when the characters are supposed to be angry.
Yeah,
they really put those filters on there. It's like their voice is getting like naturally distorted by the anger.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. That's beauty of sound design, man.
Yes. All right, we've gotten to it. You got to talk to about it now, because we got to talk about the narrative and the story.
Okay, so in Princess Mononoke, there are too many goddamn themes. There is a centralized
The number
theme.
of themes is too damn high.
These themes are too damn high. And there is a main central theme, which is great because it's basically the main storyline, which is heavy naturalism versus industrialism. And just like in Nazca of the Valley of the Wind, like I said, they both share a very similar theme. Yeah. And it's about, climate change and industrialization and what we're doing to nature and
living in tune with the laws of nature.
Yeah, and I made a little alignment chart that I don't have up right now because, again, never prepared. And
I'm looking at it right now.
So basically, we have like lawful good characters and all the way to chaotic evil characters that represent different themes throughout the film. We get introduced to a lot of different factions, I'd call them.
Yeah. And there are characters or groups of characters in this movie that satisfy every single part of the alignment chart, at least in our minds.
Well, honestly, one of them is kind of just a bit joke, but I couldn't think of anyone who was true neutral good. But
Yakul is literally a perfect character, and you can say nothing bad about him.
Yakul is the true neutral good because he's a little, what do we call him, a red elk?
A red elk, yeah.
Even though he looks like a freaking antelope, but whatever.
Also, I'd like to say that it's something that every Ghibli movie shares. It has like this central mascot character that can kind of steal scenes that they're in.
Yeah, except I feel like Yakul wasn't utilized a lot to like steal stage time. Like they actually had they had two characters for comic relief, and I thought it did well. But yeah, that it's heavy in its naturalism versus industrialism. We have the Mononoke who represent naturalism, and we have the humans who represent industrialism. We've got the humans basically like saying, fuck the forest spirits, fuck the animals. We're just going to take all the resources because we need to eat. And that's the central theme, but I do like how they do include some other themes, like when we meet Lady Eboshi, for example, and how she's about empowerment of women. This is something that, we're fighting with people and we're fighting together to get equal rights still. And this is a film from freaking 97. People have been fighting for this for a long time, and it's amazing to me how this movie is so old, 23 years old, but it still has the same things we're fighting about to this day.
Yeah. I was gonna say something now. I was just paying attention to what you were saying, and I got kind of lost in it.
Welcome to the John podcast, where I just talk about stuff.
It's
So
also
how
worth
about the
it's also
weather?
worth mentioning. It's also worth mentioning. You talk about how many themes there are in this movie. I mean, there's also like romance, and there's a touch of the supernatural, and it's just all these themes kind of come together. And this is a long movie. Like it's 2 hours and 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
And you and I were kind of talking while we were rewatching this movie together. It's like I feel like there's enough in this movie that they could have expanded this into like a 20 episode like anime series if they wanted to.
No, not even that. Like 36, because there's a lot of different arcs they could draw from this. When we first meet the ironwork, frick, what was it called? Iron something, Irontown villagers. All
Yeah,
right.
Irontown.
When we first meet the Irontown villagers, they have their own arc about the empowerment of women and their place in society. We learn about Lady Eboshi and how she's like, women are just as powerful as men, if not more. You guys are just dullards for not realizing that. And that could have been its own arc when we had Ashitaka, the main character of the series, Prince Ashitaka. And when he's in the town, we could have had him explore that side of it. And then that would have been
I feel like that in itself could have been like a 5 or 6 episode arc.
Yeah. And there's so many themes going on, but they're just shown. These factions are just shown and given a little bit of backstory to build the world a little bit to try to come back to the main theme. But I don't appreciate how many themes there are because of that. Because it's like, there's too many themes. I want to explore them all about the lawful good, the neutral, and the evil. Like I want to see all of these arcs play out.
And they do. I will say one thing this film does do, even given its long runtime, it does actually build out a really good world. Like, you can imagine a very long-form story being told in this world if you wanted to.
Yeah, and because when it starts off with Prince Ashitaka and his village encountering one of the demons from the forest, right? Mm-hmm. And how that's
kind of what sets everything off.
Yeah, and how he's fated to go into the world because he's banished from his village now to try to find a cure because he's been infected and he's on a quest. And he's just kind of a victim of fate, right?
Yeah.
And what I love is that he stays true neutral throughout the entire story, like the entire pacing. And they even set up an arc for him where it's like, oh, the demon it represents hatred, right? The demons place the curse on him. And it shows a flare of his emotions and he uses it, but then he never falls prey to the evil powers, right? Because he tries to stay true neutral. And Miyazaki even stated that he didn't want Ashitaka to be heroic or have any heroic moments in the movie. And that rings true. He doesn't. He truly believes to stay neutral throughout the entire encounter. When he meets what we would consider like the lawful good characters or the lawful characters, he doesn't pass judgment on them. He just wants them to live in harmony. Versus when we meet the heroine of the story, San, she's like kind of chaotic neutral where she's been raised by the forest spirits, so she wants them to thrive and she hates humans. So she'll do anything to kill the humans and wipe them out.
I also love how you realized while we were watching this that she's called San because she's the third child.
I didn't. Okay, again, I was 10. I didn't know Japanese, all right? I didn't understand why she was called San. In fact, I thought she was called Sun, and I thought it was a dude. But whatever. Obviously, it's not a dude. Her name's just San because she's the third child. And that was interesting to, realize. But, and it's... I just wish they had time to explain everything. Otherwise, the pacing of it was pretty solid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly,
for a 2 hour, 15-minute runtime, I'd say the pacing is spot on.
Like, I didn't even know this is a surefire sign that you've got a great fucking pace. I didn't notice it was even 2 hours long. If you told me that was like 90 minutes, I would have believed you. If you told me that was like 75 minutes, I would have freaking believed you. It did not feel like 2 hours to me at all.
See, I would have told you that when I was like maybe 15 or younger, but now my bladder tells me it's more than 2 hours long.
Well, that's what you get, old man. Old man. And the quality of the narrative, they don't really spell anything out for you. There's a lot of actions in the movie that just kind of spell out the plot for you, like when you meet the actual true lawful good versus like the actual chaotic evil. Like each faction represents a different part of the alignment chart. Which is great. I loved it. And we got to see everyone's point of view, which was really good.
I thought it was great because while this movie obviously has these themes of naturalism and industrialism, it doesn't beat you over the head. It doesn't feel preachy. Like, you feel like there's a clear message that Miyazaki is wanting to tell you, but he's not being overbearing about it, and in a way he's like telling you, well, I presented my case, make up your own mind.
Yeah, and that's so good. This is why it's the number one film in my mind for a Miyazaki film and for a Ghibli film. It's so good at showing you the different sides to every story about like Lady Eboshi. You know, when you first meet her, you may think she's like an evil person, but you realize she's more like lawful evil in my mind, because what she's doing is evil. She's cutting down the forest and, you know, deforesting and making sure that her villagers can live a good life. You know, she's doing it for the ladies that used to work in brothels that are now the backbone of her town. You know, they're the ones making the new iron. They're the ones doing all the hard work now. And it's like,
they're now the tough chicks, voiced by Jada Pinkett Smith.
Yeah, she's such a good voice actress. And it's just so good, so good. And honestly, the romance, I could take it or leave it. Honestly, I didn't need it. Right.
It was just a touch of it in there, and it's one of those things that it's barely noticeable, and it kind of shows up at the end, and you're like, okay.
See, that's why I didn't like it, because there was no point to it at all, right? There's no reason for them to develop feelings for each other than the hero and the heroine need to get together at the end. And it's not like True Love's kiss would have broken the curse or anything stupid like that. So I'm glad they didn't go that route, at least, but since there was no point for it, why did it even exist? Is what I'm saying.
I will say this as one last thing to touch on with the story. I feel like if this had been done by any other studio or directed by any other director, everything that they tried to do would not have worked.
No, for sure.
100%. I think the reason this movie works comes down 100% to the genius of Hayao Miyazaki.
I 100% agree with that. Oh man. This man is a freaking genius with these films.
I think Miyazaki may have been able to make this movie work with a different studio, but without Miyazaki, everything they tried to do with this movie would not have fallen into place the way it does.
For sure. I 100% agree with that.
All right, so to wrap this up, what numerical score are we going to give this out of 10?
You know, I honestly want to give it a 10 out of 10, but if I'm being realistic, I'm going to have to give it a 9 out of 10. Maybe more like a 9.5, because again, I don't like how many themes there are that they don't expand too much on. It does help for the backstory, so that's why I'm giving it a 0.5 boost. But I really did not like that touch of romance. That's just like, it had no part in this movie.
It seems unnecessary and to have it just right at the end.
Yeah, it's very unnecessary. Like, if you cut that out, I would have called this a perfect film, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Or if they had
and maybe
really
had a little bit better sound design with your sound effects.
If they had better sound design with the sound effects, then it possibly could have still gotten a 10 out of 10 from me. But for now, 9.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 for pretty much the same reasons. It's a nearly perfect film. It's Miyazaki's best film. It's Studio Ghibli's best film. I don't think it'll ever be topped, at least in my mind. We'll have to see this next movie, which I'm assuming is going to be the last Miyazaki will ever make, that's coming up in whenever the fuck he gets ready to put it out. It's a solid 9 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, and oh man, one thing we didn't really touch on was this movie's a little dark, man.
Oh yeah, that is something else. So compared to other Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli movies, there's a lot of ultra violence in this. There's people getting their heads chopped off and arms chopped off, and like Jesus Christ of the blood.
Yeah, there's not a lot of gore, I would say, but you do see their hands and their heads getting chopped off, and like there's death. And there's some like macabre, I would almost say Lovecraftian creatures. Oh yeah, they're really forest spirit. Please, no.
That's nightmare. That's fucking nightmare inducing when that face is coming at you, man.
Freaking nightmare fuel. But it's such a good film. Like I would definitely say this is one of the anime movies you've got to see. If you've never seen this, please just go rent it. Go get the Blu-ray. Watch it in English. It's freaking amazing.
Yeah, and also it's one of those things. So when they started doing Ghibli Fest around the U.S. and Canada for the last few years, this is something that's always in the rotation. So if you ever see it at your local theater, whether it's like a big studio theater or some kind of an art house theater showing it, go see it. It's worth your time. It's definitely worth seeing on the big screen in my mind.
Oh yeah.
And I think with that's the end of our Mononoke review. We've actually been trying to do this for a few weeks. We had to push it back a couple weeks, but it's been well worth it waiting this long.
Oh yeah, but it's mainly because it's it's a 2 hour long movie. We need a
It
huge
is.
block
We
of
had
time
to find
watch
time
it.
for both of us to sit down and watch it.
Yeah, and it's because again, a lot of these movies we are reviewing, I just haven't seen in a long time because I'm thinking about anime movies that I really like, and a bunch of them are from like the 90s. Okay, they're old,
Yeah.
and I haven't seen them for a long time. So
All right, with that, thank you all out there for dropping in to listen to us. We hope you enjoyed it because we always enjoy bringing this stuff to you. If you want to check out other episodes of the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, BitChute, SoundCloud, and Spotify. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, you can join us on Discord, Facebook, Twitter, or our website. Shoot us an email if you have any questions or if you have ideas for topics or movies you would like for us to talk about in the future. Links to all these things will be down below in the description. As always, I have been your host, Alex, and I will see you next time. Say goodnight, Prince.
what? Purple Rain? I was gonna do a bit. How dare you?
Oh, I didn't know you were setting up for a bit. You want me to do it again? Fuck
No.
you. I'm not doing it.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow to the butt.
Ass.
Good night, everybody.
My boy, no.